Former Walmart employees, what are your horror stories? Not so much a horror story. I worked in grocery as a stocker. We had just finished a cereal display near the front of the store compiled of about 100 boxes. In comes an older lady, around 60s, driving one of the electric carts. She's looking dead on at the display and promptly rams into the thing. Boxes go everywhere, and she starts apologizing over and over and explains that she's legally blind. A customer that was nearby and saw everything asked her how she drove here if she was blind. She responded by quickly turning around and leaving the store.
That's an interesting moment for sure. Working in grocery, you see all sorts of things. The lady probably didn't think about the display when she entered. It's kind of surreal when someone like that just leaves after a moment. I guess it shows how people react under pressure. Sometimes you just want to disappear after a mistake. Not a horror story, but definitely a wild moment in the day.
My mom was a manager at Walmart. She told me about this woman who was trying to steal a prepaid phone. When she got caught by security, she used the knife she was attempting to open the plastic packaging with to cut the security dude after cutting herself. She then went on to scream at him that she has AIDS and now he's going to have it for trying to stop her.
That story is pretty wild. It's interesting how desperation can make people react in such extreme ways. Your mom must have had a tough job dealing with situations like that regularly. It definitely gives a different perspective on the lengths some will go to just to get something. Just goes to show how unpredictable people can be in those kinds of moments.
Working there as a cashier since October. Christmas Eve rolls around, and thank God I'm not scheduled to work. Cue phone call from the manager asking why I haven't come in yet that day. I'm not on the schedule. Manager, yes, you or me. I'm not coming in, I wasn't on the schedule. Next day I worked was the day after Boxing Day. Went and looked at the schedule, and lo and behold, someone wrote that I was supposed to work. In pencil. I quit shortly after.
Sounds frustrating. You get a call on a holiday when you're not even supposed to work. And then to see it in pencil on the schedule? That's just unprofessional. You did the right thing stepping away from that. Doesn't seem worth the trouble. It's better to be somewhere that respects your time.
Mine isn't as bad as some of those here, but it was its own special kind of awful. I worked on third shift for a summer between college years. The Walmart I was in had about 1 hour's worth of music playing over the speakers all night, playing on a non-stop loop. My sleep habits were already pretty fucked from trying to adjust to third shift, but the music is what really did it. I heard that same music loop over and over again, all shift 5 days a week. When I left the store, I would still hear it running in my head. Then I started hearing it in my dreams. Then it got so ingrained that I started just dreaming I was working my shift at Walmart. Several days a week, I would have the experience of working an entire 8-hour shift. Then just around quitting time, my alarm clock would go off, and I would wake up and go work an 8-hour shift. I quit a few weeks early at the end of the summer because I was losing my goddamn mind.
That sounds rough. I once had a job where I worked nights too. The same vibe, just looping music and dead air for hours. I'd get home and still feel like I was in that space. Eventually, your mind just glitches out. I remember waking up and feeling like I never left the job. It got exhausting fast. I made my escape sooner than planned too. No one should live like that.
A friend of mine was working part-time at Walmart. He'd been there for over a year, was working any and all positions/shifts they threw at him, so he could try to provide for his wife and unexpected new baby. He started to apply for any and all full-time positions as they really needed the benefits. One day management took him aside and told him this was not the Walmart way, and he needed to make a plan with steps on how to get to a particular position. Apparently, anything full-time is not okay. Walmart wants to help you achieve your specific goals.
That's rough. He was just trying to do what's right for his family. It's strange that they'd push him to have a specific plan instead of recognizing his effort to work hard and get full-time status. Sounds like they really value their own process over what employees actually need. I guess common sense isn't always the company's priority. It must have been frustrating for him to get that kind of feedback.
Once I had a woman who was giving me a hard time about a coupon that was expired. Coupon people are the worst. She refused to give up. She really wanted that dollar off. My line was really getting long, and I was getting really frustrated. So I reached in my pocket and pulled out a $5 and said, "If I give you a $5, will you give up on this coupon?" She got pissed and said, "I can't believe you said that to me." She told the CSM, but I didn't get in trouble for it.
This reminds me of the time I had a customer fuss over a small mistake. She wouldn't let it go, and the line just kept getting longer. I offered her a little discount to drop it, thinking it might help. Instead, she got upset and reported me. In the end, I didn't face any consequences, but it was awkward for a bit with everyone waiting behind her. Just was a rough day at work.
There was black mold in the dairy cooler. And I don't mean just a little patch. I mean all the way along the yogurt wall. The manager who was asked to clean it claimed he did. So naturally, the higher-up management went to check his work. He hadn't even touched it. They ended up having to stand in there watching him disinfect the cooler from top to bottom. This was a well-known druggie, and it was too gross for him. A coworker witnessed one of the day's shift meat department workers take a piece of meat that was almost green out of claims and put it back on the shelf. On top of that, for a good 3 months, you could smell the expired meat from outside the meat cooler.
It's wild how some people just don't care about the basics of food safety. That mold situation sounds pretty serious, and it's crazy that the manager thought he could just brush it off. The meat part is even worse. If someone can put green meat back on the shelf and not think twice, what else is going on? It's a good reminder to always keep an eye on things.
For hours into my first shift, I was facing items on a bottom shelf while a coworker was facing items on the top shelf. She dropped a gallon of Gatorade on my head. Management refused to let me report the injury or leave to seek medical attention. I finished the shift, dazed and in pain. The next day, I found out my skull was broken. Officially, since I was not allowed to report the injury, it didn't happen at work. I rage quit.
That sounds rough. Getting hit like that and then being told you can't report it is pretty messed up. It's wild how some workplaces handle injuries. You put in the effort, and then they just brush it off like it's nothing. I get why you'd rage quit after that. Sometimes, you just gotta look out for yourself and not stick around for that kind of treatment.
Someone left a baby in a stroller, just chilling in one of the aisles one night. I was a cashier at the time, so I don't know all of the details. From what I know, authorities got involved, and the guy came back after what we think was at least an hour or two, appearing oblivious to what he did wrong. Don't think he spoke much English, so it was just a confusing situation all around. Thank God for the guy stalking who was looking out. We're lucky it didn't get any worse knowing how crazy people who come through can be, let alone at night. What's weird was this wasn't even brought up again with my co-workers, so I don't recall what ended up happening to the guy. It was just another stupid thing we witnessed.
That's a wild story. Leaving a baby like that is pretty irresponsible. It's good the guy stalking was paying attention. Sometimes things just happen and no one really talks about them later, like it's normal. It's strange how people can act, especially late at night. The whole situation must have felt off, especially with the language barrier. I wonder what happened to the dad after. Guess some things just slipped through the cracks.
Just read all these wasn't scheduled to work comments. Little lifesaver here. Always take pictures of the schedule, by phone or camera. Next time someone tries to tell you to work, send them the pic. Also, learn coworkers and bosses' phone numbers and ignore calls from those numbers during unreasonable hours of the day.
That's a smart move. I used to have a friend who would always end up working extra shifts because they didn't save their schedule. They started taking pictures like you suggested, and it made a huge difference. Anytime someone tried to pull them in last minute, they just showed the schedule. It really helped them keep their time for themselves, which is important.
As a cashier, we were required to know before we started the transaction if the customer was using WIC. So I'm going about my business and I go to start ringing the next customer up and I see cheese, peanut butter, milk, eggs, and cereal. All of these are very common WIC items. I very nicely ask her if this is going to be a WIC transaction. That was my mistake because she blew up on me, calling me a stupid racist because I just assumed she had to have WIC. She told me that was why I was working at Walmart, because I was too dumb to actually go to college. I was in college at the time with a school book under my register. It was really embarrassing and I really didn't mean anything by it. I just didn't want to have to call a CSM over to void the transaction if I did it incorrectly.
That sounds rough. It's one of those moments where you just do your job, trying to follow the rules, and then get hit with unexpected anger. People can be quick to judge without knowing your situation. I've had my share of awkward experiences like that too. You might try to help, but it backfires. It's good to remember that everyone's got their own story and stress. Just keep going.
Former overnighter here. We had an M/P truck, came rolling in at 5 in the morning, for the one receiving had obviously gone home. So the overnight crew had to do it. The supervisor got on the intercom and barked that last break will not be called until the truck is unloaded. So we hang our heads and drag pallet jacks to receiving. All goes well until the last pallet. The associate using the jack somehow lost control of it, and it went flying down the ramp. It got caught at the very end, and the wrap immediately ripped open. It was the unholiest mess I have ever seen. Tomatoes, broccoli, really any kind of vegetable you can imagine strewn all over receiving. Only a few associates volunteered to stay behind and clean it, myself being one. The rest trotted off to the break room for their last break. It took a good half hour to clean up, and I was already behind schedule in my department. I took my break anyway, because fuck not having a break. I didn't have time to finish zoning my department, so I got yelled at for that the next night.
Sounds like a rough night. It's frustrating when things don't go as planned, especially when you're already behind. I get the impulse to just take the break though. Sometimes you have to prioritize your own sanity over the workload. Cleaning up that kind of mess must have been pretty unpleasant, but at least you stepped up when others didn't. It's just part of the job, I guess.
I do not work at Walmart, but I had to go there on Christmas Eve, and it was a horror show, not just because of the people, but because it was about 120 degrees in the store. Everybody was sweating and cursing, people fainting, and the employees were drenched in sweat. When I was at the checkout, the cashier said, "Welcome to Walmart," or as I like to call it, the surface of the fucking sun. I laughed so hard I cried. I miss that dude.
That sounds like quite the chaotic experience. Going to a packed store on Christmas Eve is always a gamble. It's wild how heat can change the mood of everyone there. That cashier had a good sense of humor to cope with the craziness. Sounds like he made an unbearable situation a bit more bearable for you. It's those little moments you remember long after.
I worked there for 2 weeks. I explicitly told him I can't work these days because I'm in college. So I get my first schedule after the training, and I'm supposed to work the 2 days I have class. I tracked my manager down, told her that I can't work those days. After telling them the days, I couldn't work about 5 times. The response I got was, "You should have told us beforehand. I quit that exact moment." Also, I made the mistake of greeting one of the higher-ups who pretty much looked away in disgust, but as soon as the store manager showed up there, he was all laughs and shit. Fuck that kiss ass.
Sounds frustrating. You made it clear about your availability, and they still scheduled you for those days. It's like they weren't even listening. Quitting on the spot seems fair when they don't respect your time. and the higher-ups' fake friendliness just adds to it. It's tough to deal with that kind of environment where people aren't genuine. Better to move on to something that makes sense for you.
Not as an employee, but I went to Walmart at 5 in the morning to get some groceries with my friend. There was a middle-aged employee puking her guts out into a plastic bag while a younger female employee held her hair back. There was a giant puddle of vomit below her, so she either missed the bag a few times or tore through the last one. She was also sitting on the bag turner thing when this happened, and we still continued shopping.
That's an interesting morning. It's wild how life goes on even with that kind of scene happening. I can't believe you kept shopping. I guess when you need groceries, you just push through. It's a little surreal, though, seeing that in a store. Makes you wonder what other chaos is happening behind the scenes while everyone is just trying to get their stuff and leave.
I worked at Kmart in Sydney, Australia for about a year and a half a few years ago. I was quickly promoted to the electronics section. Most of my job was printing photos and redirecting people to better equipped stores when they needed actual equipment. However, we also hosted the DVDs and CDs. It was here that I met my most memorable customer. She was a bald mid-30s woman who was morbidly obese with her stomach hanging out of her shirt. She also happened to have a partially smoked in her ear, like an artist might have a pencil. She very sweetly asked me if they had this song and proceeded to sing it in full. When she was done, she could neither tell me title nor the artist. I did not recognize the tune, though not from her lack of talent. When she continues to look at me expectantly, I just told her we didn't have it. With this disappointing result, she began to waddle away from me. It was at this point she gave me these parting words. She turned back and said, "You look like my half-Indian classmate Andrew. I know you're not him though." And then, she walked out of my life.
That story is pretty wild. Working in a retail job can lead to some memorable interactions. I once had a customer who was really into classic rock. He'd come in just to tell me about his favorite bands. One day, he showed up in an old band tee and started telling me how music used to be better. It was heartfelt, and just a simple reminder of how music connects people, even strangers.
Not me, but this is my mom's Walmart horror story. She worked at Walmart when I was little, not even 4 yet. When I was little, I had some kind of recurring virus that caused me to develop a 104-degree fever and a severe case of hives. So one day while she's at work, my dad calls the store and tells her that I am very sick again. So of course, she goes to the manager and said she needed to leave because her baby was ill. They told her, "You need to choose between Walmart and your family." Her response was, "I gave birth to my child, not to Walmart, goodbye," and walked out. Red heart that lady.
That's a wild story. Your mom really stood her ground there. It's crazy how some places prioritize work over family. I guess she knew where her loyalty lay. Walking out like that shows how much she cared. Kind of inspiring, really. Family should always come first, no matter the job. That moment probably made you appreciate her even more. Can't blame her for choosing you over Walmart.
Happened a few days ago. I had booked off 2 days for a surgery my girlfriend was having. Booked it off weeks in advance. I joked about it with her father, how I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to call me in even though they knew why I was off. Not only did they call me, but when I reminded the manager what I was off for, they replied, "Well, what time is her surgery at?"
That's some classic work in consideration. You planned ahead and made it clear you weren't available. It's pretty wild they still expected you to just be there, even after mentioning the surgery. Sometimes it feels like they don't really pay attention to personal stuff. It's a pretty frustrating situation, but at least you were able to handle it. Just goes to show how clueless some workplaces can be.
Been with Walmart 3 years, and by far this story is one of my favorites. Working late one night, I noticed an older guy stumbled in wearing a long tan trench coat. He was taking huge steps like he was trying to do lunges or something. Next thing I know, 3 managers come from all directions, grab the guy, and walk to the back. I later found out that he was completely naked under the coat and was walking in big steps so that the coat would open up a little and expose his penis. But that wasn't the best part. In his drunken state, he had decided that drinking and driving was a bad idea. So he rode his horse to Walmart and parked it in a handicapped parking spot. The shit you see at Walmart?
That's definitely a memorable night. I remember a buddy of mine had a similar experience while working at a store. One day, a guy walked in with a full costume, thinking it was some kind of promotion. He just started dancing around. Everyone was confused but entertained. It's those random moments that really stick with you when you work in retail. You never know what you'll see next.
I worked at the Walmart deli for a few months in about 2005. You got all kinds of cliché and crazy clientele, but the most notable was the mother who came to the counter with her 2 daughters. The youngest must have been 8 years old, and when they turned to leave, it turned out this little girl was wearing a 2-piece outfit that read jailbait on the back of the sweater and pants. I was absolutely flabbergasted.
That's something you don't see every day. I mean, kids wearing stuff like that just raises so many questions. It's wild how some parents just don't seem to care about what their kids are wearing. I can't imagine how awkward that must have been for everyone involved. Just goes to show you, people's fashion choices can really be memorable, but not always in a good way.
People steal a lot from Walmart. Allegedly, prices vary depending on how much a given store loses from theft. So a store with high theft problems might charge 2% more for the same thing from an area with low theft issues. Also, when you catch someone trying to steal, the proper way to handle it is, "Oh, did you mean to purchase this item today?" Regardless of how they respond, they will probably be walking out with that item. We aren't supposed to stop them either. One guy, rightly, assumed that I thought he was stealing from the store. He was, and swung at me before rushing for the door with his cart. I don't know whatever happened to that dude, but I don't think the police ever got involved.
I remember a time when I worked retail. We had a similar issue with theft. One day, I noticed a guy acting suspicious near the electronics. I played it cool and asked if he needed help. He looked at me like I was crazy and just walked out with a bunch of stuff. Management said to let it go, but that moment stuck with me. You really never know how people will react.
I worked at Walmart for a very short period as a sales associate in foods. One day I had an obese woman, this is relevant, I promise, asked me where low-fat kettle chips were. I took her to the aisle where chips were. She begins talking to me and telling me that I am overweight and so young and better get it in check before I get old, and it is just hopeless for me and how much of a medical concern it is. I nod my head politely and 15 minutes later get away to clock out for the end of my shift. As soon as I get to my car, I start crying my eyes out. I was 9 months pregnant and due any day.
That's a rough experience. It's wild how people can be so unaware of others' situations. You were just trying to do your job, and then someone brings their judgment. It's tough when you're already dealing with so much. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, especially during such a significant time. It sounds like you handled it in the moment, but those situations can really hit hard afterward.
My mom worked at a Walmart fitting room. Guy came in with a couple shirts and stayed in the room for a really long time. He came out with no items. So when the guy leaves, my mom goes back to retrieve the items the man left in there. She grabbed a few shirts off the floor and shook them out one by one to fold them. Dude took a shit in one of the shirts and wiped his ass with it. My mom shook the poop out onto herself. She quit that night.
That sounds pretty rough. Can't imagine dealing with something like that at work. People can be really strange sometimes. Your mom must have been shocked. Quitting after that seems like a reasonable choice. Not worth putting up with stuff like that. Just a wild story to share, for sure. Glad she's moved on, and hopefully had better experiences after that.
Worked as a cashier at a super Walmart as grocery store in college. I'm scanning produce and pull a bag of apples off the belt. I'm turning over one of them, looking for the PLU produce code. The customer leans towards me and politely informs me, "Those are apples." Gives me a kindly smile. Cue my look of incredulity. Is this guy retarded? Or worse, he thinks I am because I work at Walmart. I wanted to say, "No shit, Sherlock, but I needed the job, so instead." Really? Apples, you say? I didn't know they still made those.
That's a classic moment. Working as a cashier can bring out some interesting interactions. That guy probably thought he was being helpful, but it just felt a bit condescending. I've had my share of awkward encounters at jobs too. Sometimes you just have to roll with it and keep your cool, even when people say things that make you question what's really going on.
I worked for Walmart for about 3 years out of high school. There were definitely a few times that I had a WTF moment. The worst was always Black Friday. We had a soft lines associate once that ended up with a broken arm over some stupid thing that I'm sure the customer didn't still have 6 weeks later. Ridiculous. I did meet some awesome people, some of which I'm still associated with to this day, nearly 20 years later. I've worked on inventories, remodels, and new store openings. It was fun at the time.
I get that. Black Friday can get really out of hand. It's wild how much people can lose their minds over deals. That broken arm story is rough, but it shows what a crazy environment it can be. Glad to hear you met some good friends there. Working on store openings and remodels sounds like a decent way to spend your time. Good to keep those connections after all these years.
I mentioned this before in another thread, but I was a cashier at Walmart for a while. I have many stories, but this one stands out. I was ringing up an elderly gentleman. When he stood up from his mobility scooter to use his card, I was hit with an overwhelming smell of urine. The customer in line behind him gagged. When he left, the customer and I discovered that he had urinated all over the back of the register and the floor. I apologized to her and sent her to another line while I called for maintenance and stood in front of the puddle, making sure no one stepped in it. I couldn't clean it up myself because I didn't have gloves or anything but Windex immediately available. It was at this point that my supervisor showed up and began ripping me a new asshole for not mopping it up with my bare hands and Windex. She actually threatened to write me up for wanting gloves to clean up a biohazard.
That sounds like a rough day at work. Dealing with unexpected situations like that can be really stressful. It's wild how some people react too. Your supervisor's reaction seems out of line. No one should expect you to handle something like that without proper gear. At least you made sure no one stepped in it while waiting for maintenance. Just another day in retail, I guess.
I know it doesn't rightly answer your question here, but as a current employee of Sam's Club, which is owned by Walmart, I got plenty of horror stories. So, we offer special deals for people who have brand new memberships. Something like $4 off a watermelon or $3 off a case of water. A man renews his membership at the desk, and they hand him the pamphlet with all the deals on it, knowing that he wasn't a new member and wouldn't be able to get the deals. He comes to my register. The deals don't come off. He gets angry, demands I explain why they didn't come off, and I tell him it was for new members only. He tells me then that he wants to cancel his membership and start a new one just to get these deals. He was going to pay $45 just to save $4 on a damn watermelon.
That's an interesting situation. People can be really stubborn about saving money. I guess some folks just don't think logically when it comes to deals. It's funny how they can get worked up over small amounts. Makes you wonder if it's really about the money or just wanting to win an argument. You probably see a lot of reactions like that in retail. It's all part of the job, I guess.
Once upon a time, someone didn't change the price of steaks after the sale ended, and they didn't change it all day, even after customers started complaining. They got them a discount as a result, And it was my night manager who changed the price as soon as he found out. The next morning, they expect night crew to do everything.
Sounds like a typical night shift. Stuff like that happens often. People just keep buying when they see a discount. It can get crazy if no one catches it in time. Good thing your manager noticed in the morning. Probably a lot of unhappy customers if they found out later. Just a reminder that the night crew doesn't always get the credit for what they do or keep it all running smoothly.
I was a department manager in toys at Christmas time in a store that was short-staffed due to employee hiring freezes. Now, logically, you probably think I'm going to complain about having to do the entire department on my own. That is untrue. They made me help out in seasonal and store standards while a loud, abrasive woman yelled at me for not getting my stuff done. Being the stubborn sort, I refused to push myself harder, and in fact probably started slacking more when they piled the work on me. Eventually, I had all the managers helping me do toys, because that's what happens when you won't let me do what you hired me for, and won't give me what I need to do it.
Sounds like a tough situation. Instead of stressing about the workload, you just went with your own pace. It's interesting how sometimes being stubborn can lead to unexpected support. You got the managers involved, which probably wasn't what they expected. In the end, it seems like standing your ground actually worked out for you. Sometimes it's better to let others step in when the job gets overwhelming.
I worked for Walmart for 2 years on overnights. To give a brief description of what management is like, I was a fairly hard worker, and I got my work done fast because I like my smoke breaks on time. I started out stocking sporting goods. When I could finish that in half a day's work, they added automotive to my slate too. This continued until I was expected to do sporting good, automotive, hardware, and pets all in one night. I quit and found another job. Some employees were only expected to clear 2 to 3 pallets of freight. I easily cleared 20 to 25 in a night.
It's interesting how hard work can go unnoticed sometimes. You put in all that effort just to keep your breaks on schedule, but instead of appreciation, they just piled more tasks on you. It's pretty common for some to get rewarded with more work while others glide by. Eventually finding a better job seems like it was the right move for you. Most people wouldn't stick around for that kind of imbalance.
It was maybe my second month and I took a job as maintenance. Told it would be putting cells together, fixing things, and the such. Came to find out it was a janitorial position. Working through college, so whatever was part-time. So there I am at 8:30 p.m. walking into a job I hate, just mind-numbing. I grabbed the cart and cleaned the back men's restroom, no problem. Walk to get some more cleaner. Get a page for front women restroom. Head up there with the cart to a bathroom with shit-filled underwear on the floor covering the walls and smeared on the floor. I probably walked out.
That sounds rough. It's always a surprise when you expect one thing and end up with another. Cleaning bathrooms can be pretty disgusting, especially when people don't care. I can see why you walked out. No one wants to deal with that after a long day. At least you got to learn something about what you're willing to accept in a job. Sometimes you just gotta find a better fit.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love,